to get your attention. I think we want to find our way to our color-coded seats if possible. We've waited a bit because of the traffic. We might wait another 30 seconds, but we're going to get going anytime. So we have your seats very great. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're going to get going now, and I'm glad that you all came. We wish there were a few more people here. We're going to keep working on the idea that we can add more and more people to each session that we have. So that's a work in progress, and the process that we have is also a work in process. So we'll see how it unfolds. Again, thanks for coming. Preliminarily, I just want to thank, first of all, Johnson Engineering has helped us with the logistics of these meetings, and will continue to do so. So thank you to Laura, as well as Ashlyn, Josh, Amanda, Marita. Thank you so much for your help. I also want to introduce a new team member. That's Dr. Amanda Evans. Dr. Evans is a professor at FGCU. She has a broad experience in a lot of different things, not the least of which is facilitation. So I'm going to let Amanda just say a couple words of introduction, and then we'll get back to our program. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. I've spoken to some of you already. So my role for this process is to facilitate the dialogue. And so what we've done this evening is kind of developed something that we hope will encourage that. My background is in mediation and facilitation. I've also taken students to Tallahassee every session for 19 years to have them work with their House Representative and State Senator on policy issues. And I'm also a native Floridian, but I will tell you, and I think it's important for you to know, I don't own any land in Collier County. I don't live in Collier County. I don't have any interest in any of this process, so I'm a neutral party. And that's important because I'm not going to be emotionally involved in any of this process. I'm just here to be neutral. So what we're trying to do is just get this conversation going. This is a study, and so we're going to be gathering data, and as a researcher, that's what drives me and excites me is when we start getting some data, some outcomes. And so you're kind of the data drivers at this point. So as we go through the evening, if you have questions or comments or you have feedback, we've already had some suggestions on combining the groups to make it a little more robust, and that's excellent. So feel free to do that if you think your group is too small and you want to join another group. That's wonderful. So we want the conversation to be kind of rich.
Thank you. And Dr. Evans is obviously very modest because of, as I saw her CV, it was about 18 pages long of incredibly interesting research projects. Our agenda today is to, first of all, the folks who delivered speaker slips at the last meeting and didn't get a chance to speak, they will be first up, and we give them whatever time they think they need to give their comments. I don't know how many are here, but we will call them in order and let them speak because they didn't get a chance to last time. Then I'm just going to do an overview of the RLSA process. And that is to say, how does the program actually work in practice? There's a lot of folks who don't know some of those basics, and it's always a good refresher for all of us to go through it. So that will be that. I want to give you a quick tour of our website. because it may be simpler to find your way among all the materials we have there if I just show you some of those pages. And then we'll get right into the group exercises, which really include our Group 1 policies. Those are the basic purposes and structure of the RLSA. And we're going to, and somewhat on an experimental basis, we've selected a couple of policies, and we'll be dissecting them, dicing them, slicing them, and having your group decide what's the best way to go with those. And we'll talk more about future meetings as well as we go along. So I appreciate your patience. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll get started then with those public speakers. And I'm not sure if they're all here, so we'll call them one at a time. First is Gayleen Vassaturo, followed by Michael Seif. Either of those two individuals here tonight? Michael Seif.
Gaileen's here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Oh, I didn't put it up.
Okay. Well, come on up, you're first.
All right. I didn't know I put in a slip, but I'm happy to say something. Just briefly, there are several topics that are important to decision-making on changes to be made to the Rural Land Stewardship Program. And there are several topics that do not appear in the schedule and that I think the workshops need to include. And I'm just going to name three. One is water resources. The county should include a discussion on how the proposed development will impact our water resources and how the growth management plan can be revised to include explicit elements to protect our water resources. We're all downstream of the proposed development in the eastern lands. The rural lands provide water storage and groundwater recharge, important to our water quality, our water supplies, and flood protection. Two, the Natural Resources Index. The county should discuss Group 1 policies 1.8 and 1.9, which concern the Natural Resources Index. This index was developed by Wilson Miller in 2000. It's based on outdated information and should be revised to consider the new information to Panther studies and the 2008 Panther Recovery Plan. The 2002 Natural Resource Index assigned a low value, resource value to agricultural land and disturbed lands, which in turn affects the number of credits that are allowable for those lands and also affects what lands are determined to be preserved. At the time of developing the Natural Resources Index, Wilson Miller noted that use of agricultural fields by panthers was not well understood, and in discussing the Natural Resources Index, acknowledged that the science was continuing to evolve. And in fact, in its 2002 study that became the RLSA overlay, Wilson Miller said, the analysis involving panther habitat for the study will be complemented by ongoing computer modeling of potential habitat and development of an updated panther recovery plan by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Well, we now have the 2008 Panther Recovery Plan, and we have two studies by panther experts based on years of telemetry data. And so we know now that active agricultural fields and open areas in some cases are highly valuable to panthers, and a portion of them have been identified as primary panther habitat, which all the studies and the reports agree that primary panther habitat must be preserved because it's essential to the long-term survival of the panther. So we should discuss revision of the Natural Resources Index to take this new information into account. Not so new now. And third, briefly, infrastructure. Workshops should include a discussion of infrastructure. What will be required to meet level of service requirements for such things as roads, schools, wastewater treatment plants, water plants, along that line? What will the infrastructure cost and who will pay? I think the costs are something that impact all of Collier County residents, and it should be discussed in these workshops so that we can participate in that discussion. Thanks.
Mr. C.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate being here, and I want to cover two topics mainly, which have in the past gotten short shrift, namely transportation issues and associated costs, and who's going to pay for them. The second one is the population issues, because population drives the whole shebang. And going back to the earlier studies from 2002, the population projections have been twice as great as the actual population increases. And likewise, from 2015 to the present, 2007 actually, 2008 I guess, they've gone up by 35%. Sorry, have been lowered by, going the wrong direction here, have been lowered by 35%. So our population isn't increasing nearly as fast as people thought in the past, nor in the existing time frame. So I think, since population really drives everything, it's really critical to get it right. And I think we need to get that earlier, because past studies have kind of put it as almost as an afterthought to the end. Should it be 200,000 in the rural, in our RLSA, 300,000, we've heard numbers, even greater than that. So we need realistic projections. The Bureau that provides long-range projections, BEEPR for short, Bureau of Economic and Business Projections, is a normal source, or it's a usual source for that. But we also need to understand how many households are going to be formed as a result of those projections. And that's not hard to do, probably something over 2.1 or 2.2 people per household. So you divide by that and you get the number of households. Now, when we have population projections, we also need to make sure that we have the 20% or so of seasonal people who come here, because they're going to live out there or in the urban area, and they're going to be involved. So we have a lot of things connected with population. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I think we need more awareness, and I think importantly that we deal with the population much earlier than we did in earlier studies, which, like I said, basically gave it some afterthought. So the other thing with population also is the density issues. And how dense are these new towns going to be? How dense is Rural Lands West? How dense is Ave Maria? What are we going to see in the future? Are we going to see more sprawl like we've been seeing everywhere, both in the current Naples metro area, and do the same kind of thing in the rural lands? Well, there's a lot of discussion and controversy about it, because demand is whatever the demand is. I think the part of the RLA that we're planning will be a more dense kind of a population. Now, let me just say a few things about the possibility exists, I think, and Mr. Bolsey, who's in the back here, has a model. It's called the CGI model. I'm not sure who developed it, but it can deal with looking at roads and transportation. And that's another thing that was extremely weak in the earlier work. It never came down to a really accurate assessment of what the costs are for transportation, and including what we will pay for it. And as you heard from the previous speaker, the county in the urban area, that is the non-RLSA area, is going to certainly pay, expected to pay either through their taxes one way or the other, through fees that aren't covered, or through taxes for the infrastructure, which is going to be quite extensive for these new proposed towns. So I'm hoping that the model that we have that's been developed will be able to to give us some guidance on that. You can also do some spreadsheet analysis, I've done some, and really get some handle on what things might look like. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have Ms. Bonnie Michaels, followed by Ms. Judith Hutchner.
Hi. I'm so glad you mentioned getting more people here. I'm looking around. All this information that we just heard is really important. There aren't enough people here. So anything that you can think of, bring people here, tell everybody that you know. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing. We see some of the same faces over and over, and not enough that really represents the whole population. The other thing that I wanted to point out, is this being recorded today?
Audio recording?
Yeah.
There's an audio
Okay.
recording, yes.
I think it's really important because what everybody just said, I'm not going to remember. So I want to be able to go back and listen to this. And people that could not make it today really need that frame of reference. And you're going to do a presentation that introduces the whole topic. That should really be online. So people who know nothing about this will have a chance to really learn it from you.
You're stealing my thunder, but yes, thank you.
Okay. That's all.
Is that all? Okay.
Ms. Judith Hutchner, questions, excuse me. And last would be Mr. Scott Boyd, if he's here today.
Many of you know that at the time we did the last review, I was chairing the Environment Advisory Council for Collier County, which held hearings, and I also went to all of the pre-sessions. And Mark Strain chaired the Collier County Planning Commission, so the two of us were pretty familiar at the end of the whole process with what went on during the process. And I have a question that I would like to see taken up, and that is the Rural Land Stewardship Area Plan working? That's a key question. Right now we have the 2002 plan, so that's what we have to say, is that working? And I suggest that there are some ways that it's not working. So if we're going to be looking at it, we need to look at those ways that it's not working. Agricultural land usage has decreased by over 30% since 2002. The purpose of the Rural Lands Plan was to encourage smart development while ensuring that agriculture remained protected and that incompatible uses were directed away from wetlands and uplands to protect water resources and wildlife. So agriculture has declined. Areas were identified that were environmentally sensitive, and to date, 129,987 credits have been set aside in 15 sending areas, and that's enough to allow development now of 28,233 acres. That's today. Those are already set aside. They're already claimed. Well, they're not claimed. They're set aside. They're registered. When you go to develop, you select some of those that you have set aside, or you purchase them, theoretically, and you use those to develop your land. Development was only to occur on 16,800 acres. That's what the original plan said, and that's what we were encouraged. What's in there, Nancy? But to date, one town has been built on 5,027 acres, and that one can be doubled, with several others being planned. Rural Lands West is 4,037 acres in phase 1, and it can be doubled. Alico has 4,778 acres. Hogan Mines has 1,200 acres. This all adds up to a total of over 19,000 acres already planned. They aren't planned. They're beginning to be planned. Some of them are further along than others. Obviously, Ave Maria is in the ground. Rural Lands West is strongly in planning and permitting. The others are just starting in planning and permitting. There's a total of about 95,000 acres that are not in conservation areas in the eastern part. Since the last time we met on this subject, the Panther Protection Team has actually published their results. We now have defined primary and secondary panther habitats. And these are required to set aside for foraging, for breeding, and this has to be taken into account in this plan. If building were discouraged in primary habitat, which also happens to be, in general, the least suited to building because it's the wettest, this would still leave approximately 40,000 acres for building. It would take care of the corridor issue, too. There's been a push to get more credits for corridors. Well, if you set aside the primary panther habitat, your corridor is within that. So you wouldn't have to worry. The 2009 review was run by landowners to their advantage, which is the main reason it failed. Taxpayers need a voice too, since it's their dollars that are going to pay for the infrastructure development, and their future water needs that we need to ensure are being met. They will also have to endure traffic congestion and short resources if funds are diverted eastward. Other counties have adopted different approaches for agriculture and groundwater storage, groundwater recharge. Charlotte and Lee have set aside eastern lands for this purpose where building is prohibited. Collier has not done this. Presumably you could build anywhere except the area of critical state concern, the far east along the Everglades. But at the present time, each of the 8 primary landowners wants to build a town, but do they really have this right? So we need to look at how to do smart development. How do we do development in such a way that we can afford to pay for the infrastructure to go into it? This infrastructure is exceedingly expensive. We discovered this with Oil Well Road. Oil Well Road went in for Ave Maria, and the county paid for it. It was supposed to be paid for by impact fees. They still haven't paid for the road. So even though they'll tell you we're selling houses like crazy out there, the road is not paid for. We paid for it, and a lot of roads did not get paved. A lot of bridges didn't get built. They just pull money from Peter to pay Paul. So we want to make sure that as this development is going forward, we're not doing things that don't make sense. Other counties in the country have what's called concurrency. We don't happen to have concurrency. And concurrency means you have to have infrastructure in place before you can put roofs. And an awful lot of counties believe that. I don't know what any reasons you would have here not to be able to put roofs in. I lived in another place where you were not allowed to build for over 5 years because they didn't have sewer hookups, adequate sewer hookups available. We don't have those kind of rules. So to some extent, we have to put those hats on and look at this. We want to build smart. We want to do it right. But we don't want to jeopardize the future of Collier County. Thank you. There you go.
Mr. Scott Boyd here today. Okay. Well, we'll continue with our program then.
And thank you for your comments. I wanted to just go over some basics. I know that a lot of folks felt that this should have been the first thing that we brought forward at the last meeting. We felt that it maybe was helpful, and our Oversight Committee did as well, to provide different points of view. However, we're getting to it now, and rest assured, this is a long process. We're at the very beginning of a very long outreach process. We're going to have a lot of different meetings. There will be a lot of different opportunities for people to speak about any number of different topics, and there are a number of intricate, important policies that are involved, so we look forward to that. So I'm just going to go through what I would consider a fairly basic run-through of how the rural land stewardship area is designed to work, and I'll let you know that we have this PowerPoint only in a slightly greater format with a little bit more detail, a little bit more explanation on our website at this time. So you'll be able to see that, and I'll show you where that is on the website. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time going through the intricacies of history. We have other things to get done today, but I just wanted to mention 99, we had the final order. That was where the state said, look, Collier, you're not doing enough to protect your natural resources. There were a lot of directives in terms of how we needed to design a plan, and a plan was in fact, under the governor's order, was begun in 2000 and wrapped up in 2002 with the board adopting the first RLSA overlay. 2004, town of Ave Maria was approved. 2006, Big Cypress stewardship area was approved in terms of its CDD. And then in 2007, a 5-year review began. And keep in mind that the 5-year review was originally required under the under the initial legislation that created the RLSA. So that 5-year review was required. It was wrapped up in 2009 with a report to the board. None of the recommendations from the 5-year review were adopted, and that can be for a number of different reasons. Unless anybody's interested in getting into that, we'll leave that for another day. But they did a lot of really important study. There's a lot of data and analysis out there that's available from that review period, and I think it's important that we don't disregard it. We certainly need to use it and update that data and analysis for this project. And just to add to 2009, in 2015, Rural Lands West submitted its application for a new stewardship receiving area, aka town, that's just west of Ave Maria, and that is still under review by county staff, so it hasn't reached the point in the process where it would go to the public hearing process. As we mentioned last time, what we're talking about, and I think Dr. Hushin mentioned the same thing, we're trying to find out what works and what doesn't work, and really it's not a black and white works and doesn't work, it's how well does it work? How well is this program balanced? We really want to make sure that there is a proper balance between the continued agricultural viability, environmental resource protection, and responsible growth so that the economic prosperity of the region can be enhanced. So those things all matter. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. So those are the trade-offs that need to be considered as we go through all the different policies that we'll be looking at. This is the overlay map that was actually adopted into the RLSA. In other words, within the regulations, this is an attachment that's part of our future land use element of our growth management plan. So it shows you kind of where the original plan provided, and this is in force today, the most important environmental assets that were to be protected. And so those blue areas that you see are the flowway stewardship areas. The green areas are the habitat stewardship areas. The light blue are water retention areas. All those are very important environmentally. And then the white areas, which one should argue are also extremely important, not only environmentally, but also in terms of agriculture, are what called the open areas. And only in those open areas can towns, villages, and hamlets be constructed. And so that's the basic outlay. Now you get there through a credit system, and that gets a little bit complicated, but in terms of acreage, the private ownership of the RLSA is about 186,000 acres, so roughly half are environmental protection targets at 91,000. You can see that habitat areas are the greatest, followed by flowways. The open areas are slightly more than half. Again, those are the areas where towns and villages can be built. So credits are the currency of the system. Stewardship credits are derived from those high value areas. One can argue that some areas should be higher or lower than they are today, but those are the areas that were set forth, and there is in fact an opportunity in the application process to recalibrate some of those areas on behalf of an applicant, and we'll be looking at that. It's GIS based. Those credits are then sold to developers or builders in areas where there are towns and villages, so that those credits can be used to put rooftops in other places and remove them from those particular those areas, those habitat areas. Now comes the fun part. The stewardship credit worksheet. This is what most people find perplexing because it looks very, very complicated. And if you know anything about the TDR process, and we went through it with a rural fringe not too long ago, there you're essentially trading rooftops, you're trading dwelling units from one place to another. Here it's a little more complicated than that, and it's a two-step process. So you can't read it, I'm sure, from where you're sitting, but this will be on our website, and we have a poster board we can talk to later. But on the left-hand side, those are the values that create the Natural Resource Index, and that's a compilation of different elements, including soil, ground cover, habitat values, water resource values, things of that nature, which add up to a certain score. Those scores are typically between 1 and 3, 1 being a fairly low score, 3 being an extremely high score, if you tally all those elements together. And this is really done on an acre-by-acre basis because it's GIS-based. The square pancakes you see in the upper right are land use layers. So this is really the second part of the worksheet. The owner can decide how many layers to remove from a property and thereby get a multiplier on those credits. Now the multiplier only comes to a maximum of 1 if all the layers down to conservation are removed. And typically what we found so far through these sending areas that have been submitted, they're down to agriculture 1 or agriculture 2. Just to go through them, the very first layer is removing a residential dwelling unit. And that gets a 0.2 score on top of the Natural Resource Index score. Let's just say it's a 2. You get a 0.2 for that, so you get very little credit if you only remove 1 layer. So the more layers owners remove, the more credits they get. Remove conditional uses, remove mining, remove active agriculture and get it down to just passive grazing. That would probably be, I think you would get 0.9 credits times the Natural Resource Index. If you're not totally confused by that, here's an example that hopefully will help just a little bit. If you have a 500-acre parcel and the average NRI score is 1.8, which is a pretty good score, you take it all the way down to just grazing opportunity for cattle, and the rest of it is in all those other land use layers, including homesteading, including mining, including recreation, including active agriculture, are all removed, and they would have to be forever removed. That is the multiplier times the 1.8 times 500 acres. So you would get 810 stewardship credits for that. You can divide by 8, and that would show you about how many acres of development that represents. This does not include the credits that could come from bonus credits such as early entry bonuses or restoration bonuses. But that's just an example of how the credit system works, and hopefully that gives you just a little bit of an insight. As I said, we have this online with a greater number of pages, which I think are more explanatory, so hopefully that'll be helpful to you. The Ave Maria example, people have lots of different ideas about Ave Maria, and they suffered from some unfortunate timing as far as the national international economy went. But in order to get to the table to get an approval for Ave Maria in 2004, they put aside 16,000 acres of sending areas under easements, and those are areas that were mostly habitat areas. They're along the Camp Keys Strand and the OK Slough, and it's an example of how, and I think this is an important part of the puzzle that a lot of people may not understand. In order to get stewardship credits, these are put under easements. The easements require the original owners or their designees to maintain those areas in perpetuity under an agricultural easement or a conservation easement, as the case may be. And that's done without any cost to the taxpayer. We had a real tough time with the rural fringe not too long ago, an area that all of the environmental groups have indicated has high importance in North Belmead. North Belmead today is vulnerable to development because there are no easements covering North Belmead, and the idea there through that TDR program was to convey it to a governmental agency. There are high costs in maintaining those lands. We looked to all the state agencies and said, won't you come down and take a look? What do you think you could if we donate those properties to you under state program, is it possible that you would take ownership of it? Nobody wanted to look at it. Nobody wanted to touch it. We posed the same question to the county. It's still an open question with the county. But the point here is that there's a lot of reluctance because of the cost involved in restoration and especially long-term maintenance. There's a 3,000-acre program there. The front end of just the basic first 5 years was of about 3,000 acres was somewhere around 12 million. If you look at 90,000 acres and use that same kind of math, you come up with a pretty large number. So the point here is that there's a lot of value in moving these initial agricultural uses, which include all of those things, mining, residential at 1 unit per 5 acres, all of those things are moved to other areas under smart growth principles. We're going to look at how smart those growth principles are. And in the process, getting a fiscally no-cost benefit in having all of these areas protected in perpetuity by the owners. And that's under easements, and we're going to get to that this afternoon because you will be asked about easements in a minute. So here's where we are so far today. Out of the 91,000 of the highest value areas to be protected, 50,000 acres are protected. There's an asterisk over that because some of them are conditionally approved, but we'll just call it 50,000 with our fingers crossed, and we think that that's probably an accurate number. So that's 55% of those areas have derived credits so far. So in order to protect the other areas, we have to assume that more credits would be forthcoming. By contrast, the open areas where you can still put in conservation. You can put easements over those open areas and make them agricultural easements as well. The values are quite low, those NRI values we talked about. They're just not high enough to entice individuals. So we have less than 1% of those lands being protected at this point in time. And you can be sure that with 95,000 acres of open area, we will not be allowing 95,000 acres of SRA development. So what happens with the other acreage that's not SRA development, it's vulnerable to the underlying zoning, which before this incentivized process of a SRA, of a rural land stewardship overlay, it was agricultural zoning. So they have development rights at 1 unit per 5 acres. This was a big concern at the 5-year review, and it remains, I think, a concern today of staff that that kind of sprawl is probably the worst kind of sprawl, and in order to protect those acres, there's got to be some kind of an effective program to do that. And that protects agriculture at the same time, so it's both environmental and agriculture to help protect those additional open areas that won't be SRA development. This is completely an aside. This has nothing to do with the SRA credit program. But I just wanted to point out that one of our large initiatives on the part of the Restudy group, and we have 4 different Restudy areas. We have the estates, we have the rural fringe, we have the rural land stewardship area, this is what we're talking about now. We've also just begun the Immokalee area master plan, which is an extremely important program. There's so much social equity that can occur there, and part of the means to achieve that is going to be through redevelopment. We have to recognize that there are a lot of relationships between these areas. So complementary land uses is one of the major themes we want to make sure that everyone's aware of. To the extent that we can make agriculture healthy in the rural lands, we certainly do a lot for the Immokalee economy. The people's jobs rely on it, everything that comes from those jobs, the packing houses rely on it, truckers, it's an entire industry there, and so they rely heavily on that economy. By the same token, redevelopment in the Immokalee area, we're trying to consider Immokalee a possible hub of industrial and high-tech companies, and it's ready for the taking. The problem is there are no areas for, we have problems with the low-income housing, no question about it. a slightly different question is, what about teachers? What about firemen? Right now, there are no homes there available for $100,000 to $200,000 that are suitable for younger workers and professionals. And if we want to try to entice companies to to relocate in Immokalee, we need to consider some of the aspects that might touch on rural land stewardship areas, such as affordable housing and a diversity of housing. And that's kind of the point. And maybe we'll come up with rules for hamlets that are actually close to or bordering the Immokalee urban area. That's just a crazy idea of mine, but hopefully all of you will come up with some ideas and think of things where this synergy really hits home. A lot of people have asked about the restudy process. We didn't cover that in any detail in our opening remarks, so let me just suggest to you that when it says we are here at public workshops, we're really here at public workshops. We're going to be here for a long time. We originally scheduled about 6 public workshops, and I think that having thought about it, the group policies 3 and 4, which are sort of the environmental and then the built environment group policies, they should at least take 2 complete sessions each. So that means instead of 2 there would be 4. I agree with one of the speakers. We've thought about the whole infrastructure issue because a lot of questions have come up about fiscal impact. We need to have a whole separate session on fiscal impact. And then we need to come back to you at the end and make sure that this group policy 1 reflects all of those other changes, including the credit system. And I think that's something we'll need to come back with and close with. So after we do all that, then we're on to compiling those recommendations, putting them back out to you for your final comments, collating them into what we call a white paper, which we put in front of the Board of County Commissioners. We explain what our ideas are, what the pros and cons are, what do they think about it. At that point, they don't say yay or nay to any one idea. They just say, no, you need to go back and do some more work. We need more data and analysis. Or they say, okay, let's go forward and let's go to the more formal public hearing process. And that's a long process in and of itself. Typically takes 9 months in total, and that's because it's a public hearing at the Planning Commission, then at the Board of County Commissioners, then another one at the Planning Commission, then another one at the Board of County Commissioners. So there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities for people to weigh in on these changes. And again, what we're trying to do is make a program that's been in existence for 15 years a better program. That's really the goal of the program, of the restudy. I'll go through this quickly, but I think it's important for people to be able to find stuff on our website because I know it's sometimes some websites, at least I have trouble with some websites in navigating. So please take a look at the, I don't know if you can see it in orange there, but our email address also. Please email us anytime with your ideas and thoughts. We'll log those emails. We'll keep them. We'll publish them. And it's RLSA Restudy at colliergov.net. That's RLSA Restudy at colliergov.net. And then
Is that where you submit written comments to that email?
that is one way to do it. And sometimes we'll do it at meetings, but we would absolutely entertain those comments at that location. So our website there is how you get right to our what's called the community planning section, which probably would be best named simply as Restudies, but anyway, it's colliergov.net GMP Restudies. So you get to a page that has community planning, and it has these 4 restudy areas. So you click on the one you want to see. So if we click on Rural Land Stewardship Area, we get to this main Rural Land Stewardship Area page. There's just a little bit of an explanation of what it is. But at the top is the red link takes you to workshops. So the workshops page tells you what's coming. As we said, we're going to our Growth Management Oversight Committee next Thursday, a week from today at 3 p.m. And with that, we'll be talking about this program and some of the ideas that have bubbled up already about different start times, different meetings in terms of a greater number of meetings, and so please pay attention to the dates and times. We're going to try and keep it 4th Thursday in of each month as our guideline. We think that's important. Our first idea was to skip the summer because people are away for the summer. If you have a strong idea about that one way or the other, let us know. If we had a lot of meetings, it's kind of too bad to skip the summer because then we're losing more time and some momentum, but there are pros and cons to that. Anyway, if you want to come to the Oversight Committee meeting next Thursday, 3 o'clock, 2800 North Horseshoe, please do. At our website, this is where you will find the information. So for the last meeting, you can find not only the agenda, but a meeting summary that's very well written. You can find all of the PowerPoints that were provided at that point in time. We will try to have a sound recording up there. We're fighting with some IT technology issues, but we're going to get there. And again, along the left side, if you scroll down, you'll see the new dates and times for different meetings. Back to our main page, the other area is the library area. If you look toward the bottom part, the red area that says the RLSA library, click on that. We have a tremendous number of documents. The first 3 there are folders that, as I mentioned last time, include 150 different documents. I don't expect anyone to read them all. If they do, I hope that they'll tell me how it worked out. But there are a lot of good things there. You can pick and choose really important things in those folders. It's a historical look at the program. And then we have documents since 2009, since that was kind of the end of the 5-year review. So things moving forward from there. Feel free, RLSA Restudy at colliergov.net. Send us things that you think should be up here. We'd be happy to put them here. We're trying to do it in chronological order at this point in time. We'll probably try to group them by topic at some point in time when we get enough. I want to draw some attention to the very last item you see there. It's called the Collier County Staff Memo, RLSA Footprint. We wrote that over the last several weeks, detailing what we think is the factual background of the RLSA footprint, because there's been a lot of discussion about the original intent, the original passage of it. We tried to make it a factual history as much as possible. Please read it if you can. If you have comments about it, please send us your comments. We'd really like to have any criticism, additions of a factual nature, challenge what's said there of a factual nature. At this point in time, and this is my personal opinion about what a restudy means, the word study and restudy means we're going to really gather those facts and then we'll come to conclusions. We find that a lot of times it happens the other way around, and I think people get invested and we lose the ability of their thought process. So if you would do that, that would be great. Have at it. That's about the footprint itself. You'll also, right below it, I took this snapshot just before we did it. We said that there would be another PowerPoint similar to the one we just provided. That will be there also. It's got a little more detail to it, and we hope you'll be able to take a look at that and direct others to it who haven't had a chance to see today's presentation. So that's it for that very general. I might open it for questions, but I don't want to go on too far. We started late, and I know we want to get into some of this Group 1 policies. The way we did our Group 1 policies and what we're here today and why you're in different group colors, pinks, oranges, browns, is that we want to discuss in table groups and report out some of the things that we think are important in those Group 1 policies. So it's in a way, it's an experiment. We'll learn from how this works out today. We'll improve on it for the next time around. Next time around for Group 2 policies, we'll put those Group 2 policies up on the web next to the meeting date so that you'll have those in advance. And if you want to tell us in advance which ones you think should be the subject of our discussion, that would be terrific. Group 2 policies center on the agricultural concepts. So Group 1 policies, they do a lot of things. The ones that are bolded in red there are the ones that we're going to be talking about today. Other ones talk about the nature of the overlay concept. They describe the NRI resource index and its land use layers. And I think that's probably, as someone mentioned earlier, something we need to get back to when we do Group 1 at the end, because we'll be looking at values and credits along the way and seeing if there are any changes that need to be made. Structure of the document, intent, early entry bonus has come and gone. I don't think anybody wants to see that come back. And the 5-year review is something that's come and gone as well. So we're going to talk about 2 of these today. And the first one is the stewardship sending areas. And what you'll see in your packet is a reference, I think it's toward the end, let me find it real quickly, of the highlighted area of policy 1.7. Toward the end, it says what's required to create an SSA, a sending area, and obtain these credits. A covenant or perpetual restrictive easement shall be recorded, shall run with the land, and in favor of Collier County, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, South Florida Water Management District, or a recognized state land trust. That's how the growth management plan reads. The land development code reads something differently. It talks about Collier County and one of those other agencies. And just so you know, during the 5-year review, they thought that even that wasn't enough, that it should go on to include the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission in addition to Collier County, in addition to one of the other state agencies or a land trust. So that's a little bit of background on it. I know you don't have an awful lot to go on, but here's where we're going to start with our group discussion. And many of you won't know a lot about easements. Someone at your table will. And if you don't, move to another table. Make yourselves known and let's discuss it. But basically we're saying, does it help if you have an easement, which is a restrictive item that gets recorded at the county clerk's office? It makes you do certain things and it prevents you from doing certain things. Does it help to have more than one grantee, which means the enforcing party? And that's the essence of the question. And if you get to it, I guess the other part of the question is, are easements sufficient to secure those obligations? Are there any other things that should be done in addition to easements? So that's your assignment, 1.7, if you would discuss that and look at your sheets there. And I'll hand this over to Dr. Evans, who can sort of lead the parade.
The intent, what we're attempting to do is, since this is a restudy, which means it's data gathering, is to try and get as many voices heard in this group format as we can, because obviously if people come up and give individual comments, it takes a lot of time and it may overlap. So each of your group probably have some commonalities and maybe divergent opinions, and that's a very good thing. So facilitating the conversation is really what we're going for. There is no such thing as something that can't be put down there. We divided this for each one of the policies is numbered at the top. We would like for each group just to have a conversation around what you know, in this particular case around easements, and to come up with items that you reach consensus on. Your group generally agrees, and what then action you think needs to be taken out. And some of the comments I heard in the public comments, you've already dipped your toe into this. So I know that there's a lot of good ideas out there. And then the bottom area are areas that you could not reach consensus on. Your group couldn't agree, and what were the barriers to that? And what we're trying to do is to gather this data through this restudy process so that we know what the thinking is behind the people who care the most about these issues. And then at the very bottom there you have an opportunity to add additional comments that you think need to be talked about, that weren't addressed, need to be probed a little further. What is it that you think we're not talking about? And I heard that in some of the public comments as well. So as much as you can capture within your group in that format would be helpful. I think we're just going to start with the easements to begin with. We need each group somebody to agree to be the scribe and kind of take notes. And then when we come back together, somebody who will speak in generalities about what your group discussed, and what you came up with. So somebody to scribe and somebody who's going to be speaking on behalf of your group. Does that sound good? Should we go ahead and get started? All right, great. So how much time do we have? I know we're running a little late.
Yeah, I think we're doing well. Maybe work with 10 minutes and see how we go.
Yeah, let's start with 10 minutes, and if you think that's not enough time, just let us know. Are we close? All right, great. Great. Now, those of you who have to leave, hold on, everybody. I'm seeing people needing to leave. There is a final sheet back here that is asking you personally what you think the purpose of the restudy is. Why are we even doing a restudy? And it's important for us to gather those perceptions as well. So if you would take one of those and give us that, and either send it by email, write it out here, or bring it to the next meeting, that'd be important for us to gather that information too. So which group would like to go ahead and go first and share what your group findings were? Okay? The red group, here we go. And we're actually a combination of the purple and the red groups. For the first question, my back to people here. For the first question about the grantees, we had consensus that there should be 3 grantees required. The first being the county, the second being state agencies, and the third being a land trust or a regional, local, or regional, state, or national environmental nonprofit. So you have an environmental group that's really to be part of the enforcement maps. Okay. The non-consensus item was on the second, where we talked about our easements adequate for the protection of resources. And one of the ideas brought up is that the easement should be recorded at the time that they're entered into and not put in escrow, and there was not consensus on that item. The action item is to go ahead and amend the plan with the consensus item of the 3 grantees for the storage of easements.
Thank you. And we're going to collect that and line, and we'll be adding that to our aggregate data.
Your group's ready down here?
This is terrific.
Okay, the thing we had consensus on was that we want to limit growth and sprawl, and that the county should oversee any easements with one other group, preferably an environmental group, and the easements must be in perpetuity. Non-consensus items were easements were not sufficient for preservation, and we talked about the county buying the credits. And the feeling was, for some of us in the group, I'm one of them, that selling, if you have an easement, and you put an easement over here, but you're able to either use the credits over there, or you're going to sell your credits to a developer, it still equals sprawl and more development. So we talked a little bit about that. So really an easement is a transfer of development right. That's what it is. You're transferring your development rights somewhere else, and you're going to preserve over here. So how would you make it advantageous to the property owner if the county purchased the credits for the easement? The property owner would be compensated, they would be paid money, and they would not be transferring those development rights somewhere else, which is still going to equal more cars on the road, the need for an off-ramp of 575, which the county's told they were not going to have, but they keep talking about it. So we didn't agree on that, all of us didn't. The other thing was with the barriers, and if the person just got tax credits for the easements rather than doing transfer of development rights and selling those, there was concern that the owner wouldn't get enough of a tax credit to make it worth his while. So the thought process was, with some of us, let the county buy that and pay the owner, and then we can actually preserve land so we're not Miami, Fort Lauderdale in 20 years down the road.
And did you capture that on your sheet, what you just said?
No, but I will write it.
Great. If you can capture that so that we can make sure that we aggregate that information.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, next. Bring it up.
I'm Mimi. So, we reached some consensus items and some barriers to consensus.
I wrote down the barriers first, but then we were able to accomplish a lot in the last 30 seconds there. We reached consensus on barriers to consensus. We want to update NRI science, for instance, Panther data and shallow wetland science. We believe easements in appropriate areas are an appropriate mechanism to permanently protect high-value lands, environmental lands, as well as transfer title to the county or state as an alternative is also adequate. And we believe that an additional entity for a total of 3 to monitor and enforce the easements is needed. One that will ensure that the easement is not later terminated. Well, and then the barriers to consensus, there's not enough time for such a complex issue because acreage in the easements depends on the index rate and ratios, which should change because of the new science like the shallow wetlands and the new Panther data points and wetland values. The calibrated credit system is arbitrary, so we cannot or perhaps should not start with easements as a jumping off place.
Good. All right, so that's important information. Thank you very much. Sweet back here.
Well, we have a good diverse group, and I would say we have not been able to answer either one of these questions, and it's primarily because, well, a lot of reasons. You can't answer some of us have a little bit of knowledge about an easement, and then there's a couple of people 2 or 3 that have a great deal of information because they have some of these easements that are out in rural land stewardship area. So they were in the process of trying to help us understand, because we felt you cannot answer, are they adequate? How many grantees do you need? Well, first, are they adequate to protect? You got to know, well, what are the terms? What are the requirements set out in the easement that would protect where it's, and what is it supposed to protect? Is it enforceable? How is it enforceable? You can't answer any of those questions without looking at the easement, and then also, if there's not everything in the easement, then you have to have some other information, and none of that was provided. We were going through an easement here and looking at it, and that was helpful, but I think you can't answer that question. You can't be self-dealt with simply. We got an understanding from that essentially the easements out in the rural land stewardship area are similar, but also custom to each particular area. Is that right? Did I say that right? And I guess if there's anything either one of the 2 gentlemen who have easements want to add, that might be helpful.
It was helpful that you had them there to even go back far, right?
It was helpful because we pulled up an easement and we were starting to go through it, and we got through just a couple provisions before we called time.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a nice problem to have. Have you captured that on some of it? Okay. Well, we'll take what you have, because what your point is an important point. How can you weigh in on something when you're not really sure what you're weighing in on the nutshell?
We just need more information.
More information. Good. Okay. Did I get everybody, every group? Okay, great. So, Chris?
Yes.
Okay, you're ready. So what we're going to do is move on to the next point that some of you have already dabbled in.
Okay, this is going to be a little bit more like speed dating because we're running out of time, and I'm hoping that everyone can stay just a little bit past 6 because we did get started late. So hopefully this will take a little less time, but it's certainly no less complicated. The idea in 1.15, again, there's a lot of language in 1.15 policy, but what we're talking about here and what we really want to get your opinion on is the approval by resolution. And what does that mean? Resolution essentially means that it's a majority vote and not a supermajority vote. In other words, approval by the Board of County Commissioners can either be by a majority vote, 3 out of 5, or a supermajority vote, 4 out of 5. And that's really the essence of what we're asking about. The idea when this was created is that the RLSA is an overlay. Typically in most jurisdictions when you have an overlay, and it's a zoning overlay as this one is, the overlay itself is a zoning action. So when you approve the overlay, you need a supermajority to approve the overlay itself. In other words, to approve the entire RLSA overlay is a zoning action. To approve implementation of an SRA within a zoning overlay is a resolution, so it requires only a simple majority. And that's consistent with fairly typical zoning practice. Florida statutes indicates that RLSA development should be approved by resolution, so that's consistent with the way it's being done now. By contrast, these things look and smell an awful lot like our PUDs around the county. The PUDs are a zoning action. They have master plans. They have certain deviations from standards. And so they go through a process that is a zoning action. And in order to get those approved, it's a supermajority. It takes 4 out of 5 votes. So there's a little bit of a question about that. And just the last line there indicates that there are some projects that don't require either thing. They can just get on consent because they go straight to plat by virtue of pre-existing zoning, whether it's conventional zoning or whether it's a certain type of overlay. At any rate, the questions here have to do with, do you think there should be 4 out of 5 votes or 3 out of 5 votes? And I will tell you, just by way of background, in case it matters, this issue went to non-binding arbitration in 2010 because the county felt that it looked and smelled an awful lot like a PUD, and therefore it should be a supermajority vote. The non-binding arbitrator found that a resolution or a simple majority vote was sufficient, and so that's where that ended up at that point in time. Again, it was a non-binding resolution. Despite Florida statutes, it may or may not be possible to require a supermajority, and that's going to be a legal question. And all the things we talk about, there's going to have to be an extra level of scrutiny, even if we all agree to the answers, because the lawyers need to jump in on this stuff and say what can and can't be done, and we won't know that until the end. But we're just going to pretend that we don't care what the lawyers think, and we're going to say what we want and what makes sense to us. So these questions are, please discuss and consider, should SRAs, that is towns, villages in the rural lands, require a simple or a supermajority approval by the Board of County Commissioners? That's essentially what you want to look at. Are there any alternatives to assure responsible development? If you want to weigh in on that, that's great. And does the state statute matter to you? I think you might want to just disregard that. That gets into the legal part of it, and I'm sorry I wrote that down. So I would just stick with the idea of whether you think a supermajority matters or a simple majority. Yes?
Is there, for approval, is there some criteria that people look at that the board will, that the county staff will set out for the board? How do you make a decision on approval?
Yes, the approval process is very similar to a PUD in that there's an application process that requires numerous types of application materials, master plans, data of various kinds, including environmental data on the property. So all that stuff is part of the process.
So then in terms of making a decision on approval, is it just that the staff comes forward and says this should be approved or this shouldn't? Or, I mean, what criteria?
Well, that happens in any zoning situation. That happens across the board with whether it's a PUD in the urban area or if it's an SRA and that's a simple majority right now. Let's just, for the purpose of this discussion, let's just assume that it's the same process. And there's a lot of data and information. Staff goes through it first. They decide whether it's sufficient. They decide whether this is this or that should be approved or shouldn't be approved and make recommendations. Ultimately, it goes to the Planning Commission and then the Board of County Commissioners. Sure.
I know you want us to ignore the state statute for the purpose of discussion, and that's fine. I wish I could pick and choose which state statutes to ignore. But I think it would be helpful to post the arbitrator's decision and the state statute on your website.
Thank you, we will do that.
We start?
Okay. So let's gather together here. I know some of you are leaving, the timer went off. Okay, and those of you leaving, please make sure that you get a form that tells us what you think the restudy should be. Okay, all right. Are we ready for here to organize? Pink and the gray.
This was easy for us because it was so difficult. We did not reach consensus on the issue of 3 versus 4 commissioners to approve SRAs. We had a lot of discussion. One of the barriers to consensus was whether or not Ave Maria, as an existing town, is a success. Or there were some issues with Ave Maria that have not been resolved, particularly about infrastructure.
Well, wait a minute, let me hear.
Rather than get in the weeds with that, I'm more interested in the approvals. And so if there were diversions, let's say
Generally, was that having a simple majority is exceedingly.
that's the majority.
Underlying, okay, go that way.
Majority is exceedingly.
So it's 3, 4, 5, 6.
That, and I think it was common, if there's one person who thinks differently, I think we should capture it. Because that's where the discussion comes in. Yes, great. If you capture that, okay, this group over here. Okay, so the purple and the red group actually separated out, and so I'm reporting for the purple group, but I'm actually on for the red group. Now, we'll report out for us. The consensus item was that the super majority should be required by the BCC for all of the approvals. And the barriers to consensus was the fact that there's not enough knowledge base to ensure alternatives for responsible development. Yeah. So not enough knowledge. Okay. And reporting to the red group, which is just Nicole and I, we had non-consensus items that versus a simple majority or a super majority. So we had one of us voted for simple majority, the other for super majority. One of the points Nicole brought to the table was that the loss of the DRI requirement sways her towards wanting a super majority. Okay.
Okay, so we had consensus on the county being consistent with the statute and the way the majority vote is right now because of state statutes and legal issues. If they changed it, they could be subject for legal issues. We had non-consensus on whether or not there was responsible growth. And if the county bought the credits, so the credits weren't just transferred for more development rights somewhere else, that would solve that problem. There has to be adequate water for the type of development, so we felt that was not responsible growth. And then there's endangered species habitat issues where at least one of the towns wanted to develop the priority 1 panther habitat. And also the infrastructure issues, the roads, the traffic, and all of that.
couple of issues in the non-consensus box. So maybe almost half of our group felt that if a supermajority were required, they would probably resort to a lawsuit along the lines of Bert Harris. And then the other half thought that if it impacts the entire county, it should require a supermajority, not just 3/5, because it's not 3/5 of the county, it's actually the whole county.
All right, thank you all very much. And we do have those final comment cards. Also, if you have feedback on whether or not you like the work group setup, this process of working as a group to kind of generate ideas, if you would email, it's really Chris, at RLSA Restudy at colliergov.net. I'm really impressed that I did that. And so you can send your comments there, any comments that you want, anything that we didn't talk about. If you get home and something got triggered and you go, okay, I forgot to say this, email that there. And you're going to tell them about the next meeting.
You'll find the next meeting on the meeting schedule is again at 4 o'clock, again on the 22nd of March. However, that may change because we have a meeting with our Oversight Committee next Thursday, as I mentioned. So please look at our website. Make sure you get the time and place correct. We may have a later meeting time depending on what our Oversight Committee decides. And with that, we thank you so much for coming. Great input. And if you think, I hope that you felt that this technique worked for you. If you have other ideas, please let us know.